One, good afternoon. Welcome to our webinar on researching media history. This webinar is the second for our thematic series this year, and also the second in our lifelong learning series. Last year, we had a conversation on lifelong learning with Dr. Crispin Maslog and Dr. Flor Angel Rosario Braid on the Philippine pioneers in development communication and media practice, education, and research. I am Dr. Marge Acosta, an alumna of the Department of Communication Research, College of Mass Communication, and currently the College Dean at Miriam College, and I will be your moderator for this afternoon. Today, we continue this conversation on lifelong learning as we look at researching media history from three scholars who have immersed themselves in their areas of study. Before we introduce our esteemed panelists, let me first call on PACMRI President, Dr. Dean Fernando Paragas. Dr. Hernan, over to you.
Hi, thank you, Dean Marge, and welcome sa inyong lahat. On behalf of PACMRI, I'm pleased to welcome you to our webinar today. So as Dr. Dean Marge said, we are joined today by three of my esteemed colleagues at the University of the Philippines College of Mass Communication, and they are here to share with us their experiences and insights as they immerse themselves in working and studying the history of media in our country. We are most privileged to have Professor Georgina Encanto, PhD, a pioneer and the second dean of our college, to talk about journalism. Our second speaker is our leading film scholar, Associate Professor Nick Docampo, who just released two foundational publications, one on alternative cinema and the other one on cinema and archiving in the Asia Pacific. Those are available, so please purchase them. You can visit the CMC Facebook page for details. And our third speaker is Professor Elizabeth Enriquez, PhD, who, as our leading scholar on broadcast history, is fittingly organizing our celebration of 100 years of Philippine broadcasting. So again, please visit our college page or the broadcast communication department page for details. With us today is Dean Marge Acosta of Miriam College, who served as our original PACMRI secretary and also the moderator of our lifelong webinar last year. Doing a webinar on media history was first broached in PACMRI before the ongoing debate of what it means to study history and how to use media in depicting history. That we are at the intersection of these two topics in this opportune moment makes our webinar particularly timely and relevant. As media are said to write the first draft of history, how are we to make sense of the media personnel, organizations, technologies, and content that are now recorded in posterity in our archives? Then there's the additional challenge of doing media history from the artifacts that are now being generated instantaneously with each post in interactive digital media. Our topic today is indeed very exciting, and I encourage you to make the most of our webinar by listening intently to our speakers during the presentations and asking them questions during our open forum. But before we proceed to the webinar, let me invite you to the launch next week of our Masterclass in Mentoring webinar series. This series seeks to give a conceptual framework, a big picture worldview, so to speak, of the research process. Across 7 webinars, we will discuss, as a community of scholars, what we may need to know and how we may navigate, setting our research agenda, conceptualizing our studies, identifying research gaps, building our study framework, designing our methodology, and reporting our research. The understanding of the many issues that inform the conduct of research is important as professors mentor and as students develop their theses and dissertations. The mentoring program is part of our goal at PACMRI to promote productivity and rigor in the conduct of research on communication and media in and about the Philippines. Those who will complete the 7-part webinar series that will stretch all the way to November will get a certificate. We have assembled the best in our field and allied disciplines to talk about their personal and institutional experiences and insights in each of these topics. Altogether involved in this project are over 30 academics from various colleges and universities. And I'm personally calling them our Avengers. So our first webinar will be this August 3, Wednesday, from 3 to 5 p.m. Dean March will give the details later, but let me again personally invite you to join us next week and every other week henceforth. The link to register in the is in the PASMRI Facebook page. Maraming salamat at padayon sa ating lahat na mga nanaliksik ng bayan. Back to you, Dean Marge.
Thank you very much, Dean Hernan. Now, before we get started with the presentations, some ground rules first. This event is being recorded for uploading in Facebook. Please mute your video and audio and use the speaker view. Kindly use your full name as your screen name to verify your attendance for the certificate. To pose a question or comment, type your question in the chat box. You may also raise your hand to be acknowledged. Once called, kindly unmute and turn your video on to give your question or comment. Certificates will be issued to participants who complete the evaluation form on or before 11:59 p.m. of July 27, 2022. All right, let's get on to business. Our first speaker is Georgina Reyes Encanto, who will talk about journalism. Dr. Encanto was the second dean of the then Institute of Mass Communication, or IMC, from 1985 to 1991. During her term, she recommended and obtained the approval of the Board of Regents to elevate the IMC into the College of Mass Communication. She graduated with an AB English and Comparative Literature degree, magna cum laude, in 1967 and earned her MA in English and American Literature from Brandeis University as a Wynne International Scholar and Fulbright Travel Grantee in 1970. She earned her PhD in Philippine Studies from the University of the Philippines in 1996. She was appointed Regent of the University from 2015 to 2016. Dr. Encanto has contributed numerous articles on Philippine journalism to refereed journals like Plaridel, Philippine Journalism Review, and Review of Women's Studies on diverse topics, including historical profiles of Filipino journalists during the propaganda movement in the last quarter of the 19th century, to articles on popular culture like the Tagalog romance novel and tabloids. She has written 3 books, From the Traje de Mestizo to the Terno, published in 1992, A History of the National Formal Dress and Pattern book, which she co-authored with national artist Salvador Bernal. Another is Constructing the Filipina, A History of Women's Magazines from 1891 to 2004, published in 2004, and The Community Press and Its Revolutionary Tradition, published in 2019. Both of these 2 last books were finalists for the National Book Awards in 2004 and 2019. In 2006, Dr. Encanto was chosen as a fellow of the Rockefeller Bellagio Study Center in Bellagio, Italy. In 2019, she was named Outstanding Citizen of Quezon City. She continues to do research on Philippine history and media. Friends, please welcome Dean Encanto.
For this webinar talk, I want to focus attention on the 2 journalism books I wrote, Constructing the Filipina, A History of Women's Magazines from 1891 to 2004, published by the UP Press in 2004, and the Philippine Community Press and Its Revolutionary Tradition, also published by the UP Press in 2019. The impetus for writing women's magazines and community newspapers was my awareness of the scant attention given to these 2 types of print publication in scholarly studies. Rico Jose, a UP history professor who taught history of the press for many years in the College of Mass Communication, said that, quote, "While the history of the Philippine press is vibrant and full of episodes which can make any journalist, nay, Filipino, proud, only fragments of this rich history have been written. What has been written tends to be too specialized. or too general. This was true of women's magazines. The only existing history of women's magazines was John Lent's article, Magazines in the Philippines, 1969. This clearly needed updating. Besides, it was written by a foreigner and a male. It was general and did not dwell too much on the social role or the importance of these women's magazines in the nation's history. Its approach was too general. A number of magazine articles by Lita Lugarda, 1955, Raisa Espinosa, 1980, Sheila Coronel, 1981, or essays in books like that of Marjorie Ovasco focused on the distinct pleasures offered by women's magazines, on female journalists as writers of journalistic pieces for female audiences, or of patriarchal images of women purveyed by popular women's magazines. This approach was too specific, as they did not analyze women's magazines as popular forms created by certain political, economic, and social cultural conditions, or how they are very powerful as they affect women's consciousness. I saw a need for references on women's magazines for my course on special topics, women's magazines as instruments of ideology, and media, gender, and ideology. I also taught history of the press and community journalism. And there was also a lack of textbook that would focus on community newspapers, not just the struggling publications found in communities and catering to local interests, as distinguished from the national newspapers that are often regarded as the quote mainstream unquote media, but also as publications that have had a crucial role in the nation's own struggle for authentic liberation from our colonial masters and homegrown dictators. These small community newspapers have, in their own way, expressed resistance to oppressive rule or to the dominant in diverse and strategic ways by using their dialect, by satirizing institutional state apparatuses such as the Catholic Church during the Spanish colonial years, the friars, the abusive local officials, the colonial administrative rulers during the American era, Filipino leaders from the elite who were co-opted by them, the Japanese imperial rulers who occupied the Philippines during World War II, and homegrown dictators, and our continuing struggle in this neo-colonial age for authentic liberation. There were studies in community newspapers, such as those undertaken by Crispin Maslog, such as The Rise and Fall of Community Papers, 1993, and Mass Media and People Power, A Brief History of Philippine Mass Communication, 2015. There were also studies by the Center for Media Freedom and Responsibility, as well as manuals by Philippine Center for Investigative Journalism. In both of my publications, I wanted not just to trace the chronological development of women's magazines and repeat what had been researched on by earlier studies, but also to share some insight into these publications and what role in our history and in our social cultural development they have had. In the first book, I focused on the role of women's magazines in shaping the consciousness of women, the popular images of women, as well as their self-images and their grasp or understanding of their social relations because of these powerful publications. I tried to show how these women's magazines are hegemonic in the sense that they position women as their subjects to accept their subjugation by the ruling class through their repeated exposure to patriarchal or male-dominated images, which they somehow uncritically accept as magazines are an entertainment form whose influence is subliminal and therefore more deep and powerful. I also cited examples of women's magazines that questioned the dominant stereotypes of women or offered alternative images that in effect shattered or offered possibilities for women's magazines to be a site for struggle for popular images. In the case of the community press and its revolutionary tradition, I wanted to establish that the small, fleeting community newspapers, which are always struggling for survival, actually manifest a revolutionary tradition. For while some papers can be considered acquiescent in the sense that they support the dominant ideology, there are also those newspapers that question the ruling ideology, and those the community include the community newspapers like Diaryong Tagalog and other Tagalog publications during the early years of the American rule, the revolutionary community papers, the guerrilla newspapers during the Japanese occupation, the mosquito press during the martial law years, and campus press and underground newspapers. For my research on these two topics, I went to the National Library, UP Main Library, Ateneo de Manila Library, Lopez Museum, and UPCIDS office in Diliman. My research assistant, Brian Gonzalez, also went to the Kinaugalingon Printing Press in Iloilo City to talk to a member of the family of Rosendo Moica and ask for a high-definition copy of a photo of its founder to be used in the book. We resorted heavily on online sources such as the Radical Papers, the website of Bayan, the NDF website, and that of Liberation. Undertaking research on topics where scholarship is scanty and still has gaps can be daunting, and there are many problems to contend with. I had no idea when I decided to undertake these ambitious projects of the thorns and thickets that I would have to clear in order to complete the research task. For example, for constructing the Filipina, a history of women's magazines, I had to contend with the following. One, finding extant copies of women's magazines and getting access to them. Two, difficulty of reading materials on microfilm. Number three, language. Early materials about women's magazines during the Spanish colonial years were in Spanish, so there was a need to hire translators, which was costly. Four, difficulty of getting permission to publish photos from the magazines, especially if the women's magazines had closed down, for example, Mr. and Miss and other such popular magazines that were no longer around when I was completing the research. For the community press and its revolutionary tradition, I ran into many more problems. Number one, a full examination and documentation of some periodicals was hindered by missing pages and the loss or destruction of several issues. At the time, there was no accessible copy of Marcelo del Pilar's Diario in Tagalog, aside from a photo of the front page of the paper's January 1, 1882 issue, which was retrieved from the Retrato Photo Archive. There was also little luck in securing copies of several other periodicals, which were either kept in private libraries or lost in time. In some cases, even scanned copies were found to be permanently lost due to the ruin of microfilms that were previously neglected. Number two, the presence of different languages in some periodicals made translation a daunting task. An interesting example of this was the presence of articles, proclamations, and poems in Spanish, Ilocano, and archaic Tagalog in the revolutionary paper El Heraldo de la Revolucion. Each language required a unique translator. Moreover, there were some contentions about certain translations, such as in the case of the poem Filipinas in El Heraldo de la Revolucion. Third, some materials had to be retrieved from museums outside of Luzon. For example, Rosendo Mexica's portrait had to be retrieved from the Rosendo Mexica Historical Landmark and Museum in Molo, Iloilo City. There were also attempts to contact archives and local media outlets in Mindanao in securing materials. 4. Archival materials were usually disorganized. The absence of a detailed inventory made searching for materials difficult. While some archival materials were neatly documented, such as in the case of the radical papers, there was some difficulty in sifting through most archival collections, since at the time a complete and detailed list or inventory was non existent, such as in the case of the Agoncillo and Malay archives. Fifth, seeking permission for different materials, especially photographs, was time consuming. All photographs to be included in the book had to be secured with the permission of the owner or the archive or library where they were retrieved. This was made difficult by the fact that the photographs, graphs, and other materials used in the book came from different sources, which entailed submitting a different request to each source. In the case of the Mexico portrait, a request letter addressed to the Mexico family had to be drafted on the spot at the Rosendo Mexica National Landmark and Museum. Jacobo Amatong's photograph was also secured with the permission of his family, and the photos of Jerry Ortega and Marlene Esperat were retrieved from the Center for Media Freedom and Responsibility. Next, number six, securing copies of scanned materials, especially from microfilm, was expensive. Digitizing microfilm entries and transferring them to CDs entailed certain costs, given the limited technology available to the UP Main Library and National Library of the Philippines at the time. There were also instances where machine malfunctioning hindered the digitization of crucial film entries, and key information from these entries had to be extracted manually by the research assistant. Overcoming these obstacles, the author and her research assistant cultivated rapport with different libraries, archives, and museums to ensure that constant communication will be maintained between them and the said sources of materials. Mapping out possible sources and plotting contacts among these sources made the process of securing materials easier and more efficient. Online sources were maximized for this purpose. The author and their research assistant communicated with the UP Press regularly to immediately address concerns about sources, citations, and permissions. A call to action. There is a need to digitize copies of community newspapers and other related materials and make them publicly available to democratize access for ordinary citizens and future researchers. Similar to the radical papers, future researchers are highly encouraged to produce a more updated subject guide, bibliography, or inventory of community newspapers and their sources. Given the important role of the community press in shaping the country's political and economic history, it is recommended that an initiative be launched. For example, an online museum, a physical exhibit, a digital repository, among others, to present the history of the community press, showcase its contributions to Philippine society, and honor Filipino community journalists who were killed in the line of duty. Integrate the history of the community press in teaching of Philippine history in all levels where such subject is still being taught. Encourage the growth of the campus press and educate student journalists on the history of the community press, focusing on the radical tradition of the campus press. Amidst the current political situation in the country and increasing hostility towards journalists, amplify calls for press freedom and the protection of journalists. What I did in effect through my research was to clear a path for these two types of print publications that have not been accorded the scholarly attention they deserve. The challenges of conducting, pioneering in the sense that nobody yet has conducted studies like these, are formidable, but the rewards for painstaking efforts and persistence are intellectually rewarding. Thank you for this webinar.
All right. We'd like to thank Dr. Encanto. We've just heard from her how she was able to Sorry about that. I had to turn on my video. All right, so we've just heard from Dr. Encanto, who traced her experiences as a Philippine media, specifically women's magazines and community newspapers researcher. She accounted the challenges in conducting historical research on Philippine media. Her recommendations for call to action is worth pursuing. If you have questions, please type them up in the chat box and we will raise it up once we get into the open forum. At this point, I'd like to call on our next speaker. Our next speaker is Associate Professor Nick De Ocampo, who will talk about films. Nick De Ocampo is a filmmaker and a film historian. He has made prize-winning documentaries and has written books on Philippine cinema. Presently, a member of the faculty at the UP Film Institute in the College of Mass Communication in UP Diliman, he has also conducted workshops and organized film festivals that invigorated the country's alternative cinema and produced a new generation of filmmakers. His books on film history that have been products of years of research have contributed to the development of a new understanding of Philippine cinema. As a scholar, he has been a recipient of various academic grants. He took up his Master of Arts in Cinema Studies at the New York University and his certificate in film in Paris, France. He was a former chair of the UNESCO Philippines Memory of the World Committee. Friends, please give a virtual round of applause to Professor De Ocampo. Over to you, Professor Nick.
Thank you so much. And I'd like to talk about the subject that is very close to my heart, which is cinema, and how research is related to it. So making film documentaries is a practice that demands research. It is said that 80% of doing documentary is research, and the remaining 20% is shooting it. For this reason, my entry point to research has really been my fascination with undertaking factual research using film. For that is what documentary is all about. Docus deal with the investigations of actual life processes, biographies, events, issues, concepts, even moods. You do not make docus without knowing your facts or what appear to be real for you. Unlike fiction films, where you deal with imaginary stories, in docus, you deal with the facts of your subject. You render your story based on what comes out from your research. My formative years as a filmmaker happened during the period of martial law. It was in UP Diliman where I first got introduced to film, which later led me to study filmmaking in Paris, France on scholarship. That happened in 1981, 1982, exactly 40 years ago this year. Upon coming home, I returned to the country as if I was going into the eye of the storm. Barely a year after I returned, a major political upheaval happened. In 1983, Ninoy Aquino was shot. It turned into a social turmoil, an event that unleashed a series of political unrest aimed at destabilizing the military regime. The need to find the truth in a season of lies and propaganda became intense. That was when I made the documentary my cinema of choice. The period demanded for a fierce attention to research. In research, I needed to know the difference between what was a lie and what was the truth. The films I did then tried to uncover many hidden truths in society. They were hidden or twisted because of the disinformation and false appearances manufactured by an autocratic regime. I did films about poverty, prostitution, homosexuality, child sex trade, student radicalism, political movement, women's equality, and social revolution. In short, my documentaries sought out realities from where they were kept from being revealed. Research was my tool to uncover truth. The camera became my ally in my search. But making films was expensive and demanding. it soon became only an option for me. To pursue my growing desire for conducting my investigations, I turned cinema into the object of my research. That way, I could serve both my interest for cinema and research. I felt that by knowing cinema, a form of popular media, I would get to know the country's history as well. Keep in mind that cinema was introduced in the Philippines at the time of the Philippine Revolution against Spain, which gave birth to the Filipino nation. I steadfastly stuck to the script and seriously engaged myself in research. This led me to pour myself into reading all kinds of publications. Luckily, cinema, being a popular entertainment, was commonly featured in popular newspapers and magazines. It left its traces in the ephemera that are scattered around, even in the most unexpected places like phone directories and town fiesta catalogs. There was an abundance of information to be had, but bent on finding history rather than entertainment, I became discerning of what I looked for. I taxonomized my findings or the data that I gathered into a systematic chronicle of events and an indexed tabulation of various phenomena related to motion pictures. Significantly, the concept of cinema, or rather the context of cinema, was also needed to understand the culture swaddling my subject. As years went by, my interest in research became overwhelming. It became a serious academic obsession for me. I decided to take up my master's degree abroad, and I qualified to study in New York University through a Fulbright scholarship. I did not pursue the practical filmmaking course, but rather the academically bent cinema studies program. At NYU, I trained with some of the most prominent film historians and film scholars. I became disciplined with my historiography. With America as a center for learning, my research became intense. With every spare hour I had in between classes or during semestral breaks, I poured myself into researching everything I could on Philippine cinema. With the country once a colony of America, there was a lot to retrieve from the US with regard to its cinematic legacy. This led me to visit all kinds of research centers, starting with the Bobst Library at NYU, New York Public Library, and on to my most sacred Mecca, the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C., and also the National Archive in Maryland. I saved every dollar I had to be able to relentlessly gather the data I needed in preparation for the books I ambitioned to one day write. The time I spent inside libraries and archives, museums and research facilities deprived me of enjoying the tourist sites in America, as well as New York's vibrant nightlife. At the end of my studies in the US, I realized I have not even visited the Statue of Liberty. But no regret, because my pleasure came with every document I discovered about the history of Philippine cinema. Ironically, I had to find its roots in the Libreria Americana. This drive to find bits and pieces of the history of cinema led me also to pursue it in every city which I visited whenever I got invited to show my films in foreign film festivals or to serve as film festival jury, attend conferences, or fulfill fellowships. I have visited bibliotecas in Madrid and Barcelona, where I found the very beginnings of cinema in the Philippines. I also visited cinematheques in Paris, movie museums in London, research centers in Hollywood, movie studios in Tokyo, libraries in Bangkok, Ateneo de Manila University, and the University of San Carlos. I've been to everywhere I could in search of data and valuable information to help me write the history of cinema in the country. After decades of doing research, I even forgot that I needed to take up my PhD, drowned as I was in my personal research undertakings. But I realized that while many of those who have taken up their PhD degrees, very few of them have published their studies. In my case, I take pride that I have not yet done my PhD, but proudly I say I have 11 books to my name, 4 of them winners of the country's prestigious book prize, the National Book Awards. With 3 books more to print this year, I should have 14 books by the end of 2022. In the years ahead, I look forward to publishing more books. In addition, I have essays which I also would like to publish. And in addition of this, I have writings that went into more than 50 films that I have produced. All these achievements I could not have accomplished if not for that discipline which research has taught me. I cannot emphasize enough the value of research in fulfilling my intellectual projects. In a country that is filled with many contradictions, I have sought in research some resolutions to the conundrums that we face. For all the claims we have of our love for cinema, it is a shame that we have little to show about its historical writings. For the many assertions we have about our proud film heritage, we do not even have archives to keep our films, thus losing them forever to obsolescence, decay, and sheer neglect. Imagine what damage this irreparable loss has done in terms of our historical memory, not only of the films that were produced, but of our own social past. It is sad that I had to go to foreign libraries and archives to research on the historical past of Philippine cinema. It is not enough to merely be a scholar in this country. With all the dysfunctional systems attending to our task as researchers, I, for one, have taken the task to personally crusade for the raising of consciousness regarding the role that research takes, not only in retrieving our memories of the past, but in building an intellectual infrastructure that will sustain the knowledge we have. For this reason, I not only publish books on the subject of libraries. Here is one book that I have that recently came out. It's about keeping memories. This is cinema and archiving in the Pacific, in the Asia Pacific. So I do not only publish books on the subject of libraries and archiving, but I also engage in the preservation of films and paratextual materials. In this country of severe dysfunctionality, when it comes to research services, one needs to approach the task with a sense of urgency and activism. Nobody will open doors for you. You need to unlock the closed chambers of knowledge if you want to know the truth. But researching is just half of the battle won. It is not enough that we merely rummage through our past without thinking and reflecting about it. Of what good is it to copy and reiterate events in the past, many of which are filled with errors and mistakes? How do we, as active researchers in the present time, going to consider the data that we have found of the past? This existential question forces me to personally consider my role as a researcher in the face of the challenging issues that lay before me. In doing our task, being discerning becomes a virtue. I realize that our critical faculty is being tested with every document that we face, every information that we encounter. This is why framing the past becomes an important undertaking for me. It is not enough that I make a discovery of what transpired in history, but what is equally important is how that new discovery of fact or data will be seen, appreciated, or critiqued in the present. To end, I encourage everyone to take a serious look at research, not merely as a dispensable academic chore. It is time that we bestow on research a worthy place for it in our social practice, where truth and the future are at stake. In research, we produce new meanings, and with the meanings come knowledge. It is with knowledge that we become better equipped to face our future. With that, I hope this challenge is met with vigor and determination. There is so much to do ahead for us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor De Ocampo. Sharing your journey on film research is like listening and unfolding of a film I envisioned every event in your life, and it's as if I'm watching a film on its own. Wonderfully said, Professor Ocampo. We feel the passion in your work, and we wait to engage you more in the open forum. Maraming salamat.
Thank you.
On to our third speaker. Dr. Elizabeth L. Enriquez is a professor in the College of Mass Communication, University of the Philippines, Diliman, where she teaches media history, media theory, political economy of media literacy, and media, gender, and sexuality. She is author of the book Appropriation of Colonial Broadcasting, A History of Early Radio in the Philippines from 1922 to 1946, published by the UP Press in 2008, and the monograph with video documentary Radio, an essay on Philippine radio, produced by the CCP in 2003. Both pioneering and still the only extensive works on Philippine broadcast history, apart from the recently published CCP Encyclopedia of Philippine Art, second edition, published in 2017, in which she served as writer and one of the two editors of the broadcast volume. She was a Fulbright scholar twice, in 2001 to 2002, to conduct dissertation research at the U.S. Library of Congress and the U.S. National Archives, and in 2011 to 2012, a senior scholar at the University of Maryland. Her research on historical periods of Philippine broadcasting, media and gender, and media education has been published in several refereed journals and book anthologies, and produced in audiovisual formats such as documentaries and online lectures. Before teaching in the University of the Philippines, she worked in radio and television for 18 years, from 1971 to 1989, mostly as a broadcast journalist. In 2015, she returned to the air by hosting programs on UP's official radio station, DZUP. She also hosts shows and delivers video lectures on TVUP. Friends, please welcome Dr. Betsy Enriquez. Over to you, Dr. Enriquez.
Maraming salamat. Magandang hapon sa inyong lahat. I'm going to start by preempting one of the questions that have been prepared by Dean Marge, which asks about my inspiration to conduct research on the history of broadcasting in the Philippines. So Dean Marge mentioned that I worked in television and radio for 18 years. And so that was actually my first career, not teaching. Teaching is something that I did not expect to do until I started doing it. So because of my long experience in broadcasting, it gave me a certain level of familiarity with the workings of the broadcast industry. And to a certain extent, its history as well, although I did not know a lot of details about the history of broadcasting at that time that I was working in radio and television. But when I started teaching, when I retired from television and then I started teaching, I noticed immediately the dearth of material on the history of broadcasting in the country. We knew more about the history of broadcasting in the United States and even Europe than our own, and there was very little published on broadcasting in the Philippines. I would say only about 20 pages of material that had been published in some journals. Siguro maging 50 yan, pero puro they were all quoting each other. So there was not really much to go around, no? So because of this, I decided to work on the project of researching and writing the history of broadcasting in the Philippines. Of course, I started with the American colonial period because that was the earliest period, and that was farthest from our memory, and therefore the one that's easiest to forget. So that's the project I decided I was going to work on when I did my PhD. So when I began my PhD program, I decided to take up Philippine studies, and my areas of concentration or my majors were history and sociology, not mass comm. No? And the reason I did this is because I felt that I needed to get the framework and methods that I believed I needed to work on the project. And my very first realization was this: broadcasting is a medium that has not been as well documented as newspapers, magazines, and other printed media, and cinema. Television has relatively more extant material available to scholars, but radio has very little. And this may be explained by the fact that radio does not require the production of tangible materials in order to produce texts. And this is what has made the construction of the history of radio broadcasting challenging for historians, because of the paucity of archival materials and other primary sources, given that radio signals are ephemeral and no written record or sound recording of programs were necessary to produce them. Unlike print, you have to actually make the printed page to be able to come out with the material, and therefore that is an automatic record of the product of journalism. Cinema as well, you have to actually produce the celluloid or the physical form of the movie in order to show it, no? But radio did not need that, and therefore there was very little recording, no, of if at all, no, of radio material, particularly during the early part of the 20th century. Moreover, radio stations do not routinely archive their programs, no, even today, especially during the first several decades of in the 20th century, when efficient recording technologies were still under development. And not only that, they were expensive, no? They were expensive to make, and they were expensive to keep and maintain, no? So the other thing is that World War II contributed to the destruction of materials that would have given us a clue of what radio was like in the past, no? And furthermore, the study of popular culture, of which radio broadcasting was a part, was not taken seriously in academia until about 40 years ago, no? And that's why in this research, the biggest challenge was sources, okay? So let me talk about secondary sources first, no? So like I said, the study of broadcasting is relatively new, and the attention to popular culture was such that pop culture was considered low art. And so studies were either very little or disparaging, no? As a result, there's not a lot of secondary sources to begin with. What's there can be found mostly in newspapers and magazines, not academic publications. Broadcasting as an academic program began at UP in the late 1960s, principally as a professional training program. Academic studies were then secondary in the area, though that has changed in the last 20 years, no? We now have actually a lot of courses, several courses that focus on theorizing and research in broadcasting. Okay, so the more critical challenge actually when it comes to sources is the lack of primary sources. Like I said, we suffered the destruction, a lot of the materials in the library, in our national library, our national archives, also in the big libraries like the Library of the University of the Philippines at that time, were destroyed, no? A lot of them were destroyed as a result of the chaos during the war, particularly towards the end of the war. I mean, there was so much fighting between the Americans and the Japanese, no? But this is what's interesting. Copies of the documents of the American colonial administration, as well as business and commerce documents during the period, official reports now of the American colonial administration, were all sent to Washington, D.C., okay, and are all archived today in the Library of Congress and the National Archives in Maryland. So Professor De Ocampo mentioned these two facilities earlier in his lecture, and those also were my go-to facilities, no, were my mecca, as the term he used, no, to research on broadcasting history, broadcasting in the Philippines, particularly during the American colonial period and the World War II period. So what I did was I applied for a Fulbright scholarship, and luckily I got it. And during my first Fulbright scholarship, what I did was to conduct dissertation research. It was not that easy. It wasn't like the material was there waiting for me. You have to plow. I had to plow through boxes and boxes and boxes of archival material, of documents, and look for something that would tell me about broadcasting in the Philippines. I did find material, no, and enough to be able to come up with something that I would say is the first of its kind, no, in the Philippines or in academia. Can I just show you? Okay, this is the one. This is the book that came out of that was produced due to as a result of my dissertation research. So actually, Dean March mentioned this already. So, okay, let me stop sharing that. And then, oops. Let me just, okay. So, but there are actually sources here in the Philippines as well, no? So you don't have to go to the United States all the time just to do that, no? I felt that I needed to because I was researching precisely on the American period and the Japanese period. But you will find my research in the last 4 years actually made me realize that there are a lot of materials here for the later periods, for the post-war period, no? But you just have to work very hard at getting them because again, you have to plow through a lot of material in several libraries to be able to get something. Okay, so like I said, the focus of my research has been the American and Japanese periods, but I continue to work on the subsequent periods. And in fact, I have published on broadcasting after the war and also during martial law. And as was mentioned earlier, I co-edited the broadcast volume of the Cultural Center of the Philippines, Encyclopedia of Philippine Art, and where I wrote several entries, including the histories of broadcasting, particular periods, American period, Japanese period, the post-war period, and part of the martial law period. Okay, so let me show you a few slides. Okay, okay, so this is actually okay, I don't know how to make it there. Okay, this is actually part of a very long lecture. I'm not going to give the lecture, okay, because we will be here all night, no, because I use this in several installments actually in my history classes, no. I just want to show you a few of the slides from this presentation so that we can talk about some of the insights which I think are important after I had done some research on the history of broadcasting in the Philippines. I'd like to first mention that the context that I used in studying the history of broadcasting in the Philippines, no, is political and cultural, no. So the particular historical context is, like I said, is the American colonial period, no. And these are the insights that I have generated, the arguments actually that I posed after I had done my research. First, the Americans actually valued broadcasting and in fact pushed for broadcasting to be established in the Philippines during this period because they saw it as an important medium to reshape the consciousness of Filipinos towards the United States. No? For me, it was actually a very powerful medium, as powerful, if not more so, than the public school system introduced by the Americans. No, we always talk about in our history books. We always read about the public school system as one major strategy, used by the Americans to be able to teach the Filipinos and reorient our consciousness towards American culture. No, but I would argue, or I have always argued, that actually radio might be more powerful because you did not need to go to a school to be able to listen to it. You did not need to learn how to speak the language. You just had to listen to it. And you did not need to, you didn't need to be literate, no? During this period, most of Southeast Asia actually had a relatively low level of literacy, particularly literacy in the language of the colonizer. No? So it was difficult also for print media to reach the entire population. As a matter of fact, even if everyone could read, not everyone could be reached by newspapers and magazines because they had very limited circulation, and it was difficult to send them to all corners of the country. No? Okay, and the other important reason, the way I see it, no, of radio to the Americans is that it actually aided the American business in the colony. No, it was an effective advertiser of everything American, no, including imports from the United States. Apart from the fact that broadcasting itself was expected to become a profitable business, such that in the beginning, in the first few years, the Americans actually subsidized part of the cost of operation of the first 3 radio stations until the early part of the 1930s. But by the middle of the 1930s, radio was already a relatively mature business, and the radio stations were already able to support themselves. However, this is one thing that's important to realize. No? While the Americans were the first, they were the first broadcasters. They were the ones who established the standards, not only of content production but also of the technical standards of broadcasting. They did not have enough manpower to fill in the content, to fill in the airtime that required content, no, in all the stations, no. So there were, I think, every station. I did some computation on this in the past, no. Every station needed roughly 100 hours of content to be produced a week, no. And this was in the 1930s, no. 100 hours is not a joke to produce. And think that during this time there were no recorded programs. Everything was live. Everything was live. And everybody rehearsed for a program before actually going on the air. So it was a lot of work. No? So what the Americans did was that they decided to train local talent so that they could actually contribute to the production of content on radio. And they found that the Filipinos were already, actually a lot of Filipinos were already trained both in classical and popular music. So that was easy. And so after they had trained a few to go on the air, to do their own music, to actually in the beginning to sing American songs, no, and to copy the American music, no, and then the next thing that they did was to actually train local talent to become announcers and later on newscasters, no. Okay, so. But what happened here is that because of this need to deploy local talent to produce content for radio, this actually opened the door for the insertion of the local on the air. No? So pumasok dito yung mga those who actually were in the production of zarzuela, vaudeville, comedia, and these productions, no, these were actually, the theater was on the decline, no, because now radio was there already, film was already there, no. So well, film you have to pay pa nga to enter the movie house, no, but radio, no, you just had to turn on the radio set. You didn't have to pay anything, no. If you cannot afford the radio set itself, no, actually the government then, the American colonial administration, subsidized the purchase of radio sets for the barrios, for the barangays, no. And of course, nag-umpisa na dito sa panahong ito pa lang yung nakikipakinig ka sa kapitbahay. So such that yung minsan yung isang kapitbahay na may radyo, isang pamilya lang silang nakatira sa loob ng bahay na yon, pero ang nakikipakinig sa radyo nila ay minsan umaabot ng 400, no. Meron ako isang data na nakuha tungkol dito. So it was a communal activity and it was free. No, it was free, so it was easier. Okay, and the Filipino audiences demanded or appreciated very much the local music, the local language, and therefore they were when the kundiman, the balitaw, and all our folk songs were able to come in, this was very much appreciated, no, by the audiences. Eh, yung mga Amerikano, even though their principal goal was actually to Americanize, no, the Philippines through many means, including radio, no. They also realized that if we give the audience what they want, they will be able to earn more in terms of advertising. So they allowed this to go on the air. And the significant method of this strategy was block timing. Okay, so nag-umpisa na yung block timing noon palang panahon na iyon. Like I said, the ones who used to be in Comedia, Moro-Moro, Vaudeville, Zarzuela, they were the ones who became the first block timers on radio. Okay. When the Japanese invaded and occupied the Philippines, Filipino music and Tagalog were encouraged on the air alongside Japanese material. But the Filipinos perceived it as propaganda and thus rejected it. No? So nasanay na kasi yung mga Pilipino dun sa diet of American programming plus yung komedya and vaudeville, which actually also began to acquire the idiom or the style of American show business, no? And so when the Japanese came and controlled radio in the Philippines, and radio became utterly serious, no? Filipinos found it very boring, no, because there were all speeches and speeches and speeches. Plus, they did not believe what what was going on the air because they saw it as propaganda. Okay, post-war, the American style of programming returned as television was introduced in 1953. News and political commentary became important. The concept of a free press, given its absence during the war, was jealously guarded. No? English was still the standard language on the air, but Tagalog, as well as other Filipino languages, asserted their presence, particularly through the new medium of soap opera. A significant amount of foreign material was on the air, but local talent competed for airtime, especially with the growth of the local recording industry. No? So pagkatapos pa lang ng giyera, tsaka lang umunlad yung recording industry. Pero nung time na yon, medyo hindi pa siya masyadong technically sophisticated. No? So broadcasting became a profitable industry. And it was in private hands before the war and after the war. Broadcasting was in private hands. Its owners and operators were the rich and powerful, including Americans in the Philippines. Notice that the Americans at this point were allowed to operate utilities in the Philippines and actually exploit our natural resources and have equal rights as Filipinos to do that, no? Because of the parity rights that were imposed by the Americans after the war, no? Which actually forced us to change our constitution so that we could accommodate that imposition, no? And that extended to radio, no? And television, actually, until martial law, no? That the Americans could invest in radio and television as much as they want to, you know, and pose competition with the Filipinos. So this media power then and now was a critical tool for maintaining political power and economic privilege. And this is one of the areas that I think needs to be studied all the time when we investigate the history of broadcasting in the Philippines. Broadcasting and other media were the first to be tightly controlled by Marcos when he declared martial law because he was aware of its power. The media endured the repression, but like in previous periods, there was resistance simmering beneath the surface. This boiled over beginning at the assassination of Ninoy Aquino until the 1986 revolt. Ironically, during this period, the so-called original Filipino music thrived, and the Marcos Constitution gave Filipinos exclusive ownership of media companies. No? Post-Marcos, the return of the lively press came with new communication technologies that have changed and are still changing the media and its publics profoundly. No? The ownership and control remain with those who possess the capital, both the political and economic power. But the state can still curtail that privilege and license, as in the time of Duterte, as we all know. No? The pandemic has also forced the redrawing of both media production and consumption. And this is something that is happening in the present, but we need to record for tomorrow's history. Okay, I'm going to end there because this, beginning with this slide, I go into the details of the history. So perhaps I reserve that for another time. And we can go to the questions, I suppose.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Enriquez. Dr. Enriquez walked us through the different periods of broadcast history. We also heard her personal journey as a researcher. The rigor involved in your work, Dr. Enriquez, I could feel it. I imagined you plowing through the boxes of materials when you were doing your research. And I'd like to just add, I guess, now I'm just guessing, when you saw pertinent information, I could almost hear your sigh of relief and joy. And now it's in your book. Yes.
Really, really, yeah.
Oh, wow. And I'm sure it is the same with Dr. Encanto as well as Professor De Ocampo. Well, before we continue, I'd like to thank all our speakers. And at this point, I would like our speakers to turn on their videos so that we could proceed to our open forum. Is Dr. Encanto present in this virtual room?
There she is.
Oh, all right.
Hi, George.
All right. And before we do welcome hello there, Dr. Encanto. Before we do look into the questions in the chat box, I'd like to just share that when you comment and when you have your questions, do type it in, but you may also raise your hand to be acknowledged. And once called, kindly unmute and turn your video on to give your question or to be able to relay your question or your comment. All right, let's check. Dr. Hernan, do we have questions posted already in the chat box? We don't have so far, but we do have our students, our faculty in attendance in this virtual space. So please go and share your questions and allow us to engage our speakers. And while waiting, baka what we could do is post some questions already. Dr. Hernan, if you do see any question in the chat box while we're already engaging our speakers, kindly just unmute and tell us if there is indeed a question or a comment there. Okay. In your sharing, dear speakers, I already sense, and you did share, what inspired you to pursue your line of research. So for Dr. Encanto, the line of research is obviously on magazines and community press. For Dr. Enriquez, on broadcasting. And of course, for Professor Nick, it's on film. Although you mentioned it, maybe you'd like to just succinctly, what really was the inspiration, yung in one sentence, what is it? Is it really just an advocacy? I don't know. I don't want to put words into your mouth, but what is it in succinctly? What really is the inspiration for this field or area of research that you are in? We could start, of course, with Dr. Encanto, then proceed with Sir De Ocampo, and then with Dr. Enriquez.
So maybe I should have gone back to my childhood and said that
Wow.
I lived in a household full of magazines because my mom was a collector of magazines.
There you go.
She had these mostly American magazines because she loved reading them, and she would go to the 5 and Up stores, and her idea of a favorite trip out of town was to go to Pampanga and go from, store to store where they were
Oh,
selling
yes.
secondhand
That's right.
American magazines.
That is
So
right.
she liked doing that. So, you know, sometimes my father would have to wade through piles of magazines just to get to the bed. But my curiosity about magazines must have started there because, my mom was addicted to them.
Yes.
So later on, of course, I knew that, locally we have the WY and other that publications. But it was the English magazines that I was exposed to. So when I was teaching women's magazines for the special topics course in the journalism department, I thought of teaching women's magazines as instruments of ideology because
Right.
they're popular and very powerful. I mean, women buy them and read them, and they're entertainment forms, and therefore their power is deeper because women are uncritical when they read them in at home or in beauty parlors or wherever they consume them. I mean, they're not there to be critical and analytical and all that. Usually they just want to enjoy the pleasures of the magazines, from the visual pleasures to the fashion, homes and gardens, and all those topics that they enjoy. And so I'm saying that these seemingly ubiquitous and seemingly harmless publications actually wield a very deep power, and how women look at the world and perceive themselves and
That's right.
relate to others, because they're made to think, for example, that the women are the queens of the home,
Mhm.
or that their role therefore is limited to the domestic
That's
role, not
That's
the
right.
public role. So right away you see that, and in the early women's magazines, usually women were uh, set in those roles. They're queens
The
of the home.
roles. That's right.
Their roles were domestic, etc. But actually, it's not completely true, because even during the Spanish times, the women would be very entrepreneurial, and they
That's
would find ways of also asserting themselves. So I think that women's magazines are a dynamic form. You cannot just say that they're patriarchal and they categorize women and uh, imprison them in stereotypes. There are also ways for women to question those images. And you can see this in the development of women's magazines in every historical period, during the American period, because
That's right.
then women were already being educated, and therefore they became more conscious of
All right.
their possibilities to become professionals. They became teachers,
Mhm.
they became nurses, and then even in the first decade of American rule, you had organizations to promote breastfeeding, or women's organizations
Wow.
that
That's right.
tried to reach out to the public life and not
Through
just limit women to the
Yes.
home. Of course, we
Yes.
know 1935 we had women's suffrage already. So
That's
again,
right.
you can see the changing role of women in the magazines. And of
Correct.
course, in the post-war years, women's magazines became more lucrative because media had become big business by then. I mean, something we got from the Americans, and so these women's magazines were part of the media. Every mainstream newspaper had its own women's
That's right.
magazine. This
Women's
week,
magazine.
Sunday Times Magazine was very
All right.
popular.
Okay. That's
Then-
right. Mhm.
Okay, so then during the martial law years, of course, Professor Del Campo mentioned, the turning point was the assassination of Ninoy Aquino. So that, also made women's magazines realize that, they didn't have to be part of the repression, that they could also be a way of expressing resistance. And so these women's magazines, especially during the time of Egi Apostol, they became, while they still had the formula of garden, recipes,
serialized stories and all of that. Eddie Apostol started, let's say, encouraging consumerism, for example, or women becoming more active about issues like, the cost of products, etc. And therefore, this Mr. and Miss actually became one of the revolutionary, or one of the newspapers that questioned martial law. It became as a means, especially after the assassination of Ninoy Aquino.
Yes,
for
Dr.
the,
Encanto. All right.
opposition to express their resistance to everything, the excesses of the martial law regime, you know. They even, and Eddie Apostol found a way, for example, to publish songs of the street demos. And then she even had paper dolls of the characters in at that time, Cory Aquino and all of these political figures, and they'd go to Malacanang and wear what clothes they would wear, etc. So actually, the women's magazines, and I think I should mention this, Marcos paid attention to repressing the newspapers and the broadcast, the radios and TV, but he thought women's magazines were harmless. So that's what the women used at that time. So I think, I studied magazines up to the 2004, that period. And I was saying there that, there was a proliferation of magazines after the martial law years. So you had Cosmopolitan, Preview, Megan, all of those. No? And, they claimed to be liberated and to be, but I didn't find them liberated.
All right. Of course. So that's thank you very much, Dr. Encanto. No, of course we could read the books of Dr. Encanto, but that question, no, what really inspired you? I like that. I like that you've actually referred to your childhood, and so I hope you don't mind me cutting you there, because we'd like now to proceed to Professor De Ocampo on the real essence of that inspiration. We heard it also, you shared, but what is it? Is it like Dr. Encanto that goes all the way back to childhood, Professor De Ocampo?
If you don't mind, I would rather go now to our questions. If Dr. Enriquez is okay. I mean, the questions are now pouring in.
All right.
I mean, we can always talk about our personal motivations. Very simply said, and whether people will believe me, that the search for truth was something that was crucial. But, people can say the same thing.
That's right.
I guess I've been looking at the scrolling down on the questions that are now being thrown in sa ating chat box, and they're very, very interesting. So
that's right.
Maybe we can start with that.
Sure. Thank you very much, Professor.
If that's okay with Dr. Enriquez.
Okay. Yes. Well, thank you very much for opening that, Dr. Professor De Ocampo. All right. So we'll start with the question of Dr. Lumibao here, regarding any legal impediments you encountered while doing historical research. And I'll move over also to the second regarding ethics, on ethical consideration and whether this is kept best in mind when researching media history. So any one of you, maybe not all will be able to answer, but maybe you'll raise your hand and who could actually manage this. Go ahead, Professor De Ocampo.
Yeah, because I'm in the sequence, I'm next. So I found Professor Lumibao's question very interesting because censorship was a very important issue. I'm sure Dr. Enriquez, Dean Encanto will agree with me, especially in those moments of crisis. The moments of crisis were in the hegemonic powers, whether they may be the American government, of which in cinema, censorship really happened in 1911, 1912. And the first chief censor was George Seaver, an American. I'm sure a similar thing siguro nangyari din sa magazine natin at saka sa broadcast. I'm very eager to hear them. So that is one important thing. Pagdating naman sa Japanese War, I mean, there was only a monolith there, the Japanese military. And
that's right.
I can name one Hidemi Kon, for example, the head of the film department of the Eiga Haikyusha, which was the main censorship body during World War II, all right? Then, okay, there was a moment of liberation right after the war, fine, but what would come next, you know, as almost like a vicious cycle? Martial law was declared, and once more, you know, it parallels the Japanese era, you know, wherein there was a power was or power resided in the hands of an autocrat, and so on and so forth. So cinema was there all the time, you know, as a kind of a you know, a punching bag, you know, because much as radio may be more prevalent and widespread, but cinema always takes the headline news, you know. I mean, it's always on the popularity list. And so whatever happens to cinema suddenly is magnified. Even the radio will talk about it. The print will talk about it. So all of these political hindrances, mainly para sa akin, very obvious is censorship. I can talk about other things at maybe first round na muna ito so you can hear everybody. Then somebody can talk also about the political implications, and we can do another round of ethics.
Yes. All right po. So as already started by Dr. De Ocampo, how about Dr. Enriquez now, no, in terms of the legal impediments while doing your research? And then siguro nga po the next round would be on the ethics na po. Sige po, tuloy po natin, Dr. Enriquez.
I'm not sure, Dr. Lumiba, what Dr. Lumiba is exactly talking about, whether it's legal impediments in the practice of the medium during the periods we researched in, or legal impediments in the conduct of our research. No? So if while he's talking about legal impediments, such as censorship, which has already been discussed by Nick, yes, that was present, no? On radio, it was subtle during the American period, no? Hindi siya lantad, no? But there was some level of control, no? Siyempre, mas lantad siya during the Second World War. It was very obvious, you know, what the Japanese did. In fact, they had an office or a body that actually took care of censorship of everything. No, the Hodobu, no, censored not only print, broadcast, and film, no, and took charge of the production of all of these contents, but also censored theater, schools, no, and managed the production of music, etc., etc. No? So there was control there, and then after the war, and actually throughout the entire period up to now, there is a different kind of control that is not obvious again to all of us. So I'm not even going to talk about martial law because that's very obvious, no? and also the controls that we witnessed, no, in the last few years, no. But there is an even more subtle form of control, no, and that is that media is an expensive proposition, and therefore only those who have capital can go into it, no? Correct. To produce popular media anyway. No, I'm not going to exclude the small media organizations. Nandyan yan eh. They're there, no? Community radio, community papers, no? Independent cinema, nandyan sila, no? And not every, those can be produced with much less capital, no? But if you want to be mainstream, no? If you want to make to get back, no, in terms of profit, your investment, you're going to be very big. No, you have to be very big, and only those with capital, with economic capital, can go into it. And who are those who have the economic power? Those who have the political power.
Yes.
So yan. So, but that's one, no? And then now nahaharap na naman tayo sa posibilidad na meron na namang mas lantad na paraan ng pag-control, no? But yan bantayan natin, matyaga natin. Let's see what's going to happen in the next several years, no? But if I may talk about the other type of legal impediment that I suspect Huawei is talking about, is whether we encountered any legal problems, no, while doing research. I did, no, when I was doing research on material on radio that were actually recorded by NBC in New York during the American colonial period, and particularly during the war. I wanted to access them, but copyright laws in the United States are fierce, and therefore I could not access such materials unless, first of all, I go through a maze of permissions that, you know, I needed to be able to access them, and also pay. Okay,
Oh,
so
okay.
because the law protects the copyright. So natapos na yung scholarship ko, hindi ko pa siya napapakinggan. So there were a lot of materials actually that I was not able to access because of copyright laws, no. And here that's happening. It's also happening here in the Philippines, no. There's a lot of material that are being archived by the big networks. Actually, only a few nets, maybe 2 or 3 networks only, and we cannot just access them because you have to pay for it, no?
All right.
Because they're protected by copyright laws. So yun ang isang problema.
All right. Sige po. You know, in the question, there's about ethics and how the younger generation can also do the practice. How do we go about that? No, what are the ethics, and how could the younger, maybe tips on how the younger generation could do this? And you mentioned, Dr. Enriquez nga, no, yung access, kasi now everything is digital.
Yes.
And people pirate things left and right, and there's such a copyright, there's such a copyleft. So how do we go about this already, ethics, and how you can actually have and inspire our younger generation on the kind of research that you've been doing, the rigor that you have? And then now that accessibility is actually, you say it's difficult, but there is such a thing as, you know, it's just all, you know, it can be accessible. Somehow it can leak. So anyone who would like to answer that, because that's pretty much covering about 3 to 4 questions already here. Ethics, how our younger generation can do the kind of rigor that you have in your research, that you have done in your research. Any tips for them?
Well, if they're not going to say anything, I will yeah, come in. Yeah, ethical practices should always be top of mind. You know, we have to be conscious of what we do, our behavior as researchers.
Okay.
And we have to know what is ethical or unethical. No? I think the most basic thing is do no harm. Okay, what we do should not harm anybody. All right. So and that's going to be a big discussion, no? Kasi marami ng ethical issues ngayon, eh. For example, how do you deal with material online, no?
Yes.
Hindi yan isang ethical issue lang, maraming ethical issues. Kung pag-uusapan natin ng copyright, by the way, just because it's there doesn't mean it's free. Okay? Marami diyan na kapag ginamit mo, pwede kang habulin nung may-ari. Okay? And that can happen. So don't presume that just because it's online, it is always free to use. So one of the things you need to do if you want to use material that you find online is ask permission from the owner. In most cases, if not all, the owner is named in the site or in the material that you will find online.
Correct.
Ask permission. Don't just use it, no? Even if it's open source, no? Even if it's free to use, it is ethical to ask permission to use the material, no? And then, of course, there are a lot of other ethical considerations, and maybe Dr. Encanto and Professor De Ocampo would like to contribute to that, no?
Yes, in their own field, yes.
Yeah.
How about Dr. De Ocampo, no? Professor De Ocampo, in your own field, in film, and now that they're all digitized, it's as if everyone can have access to them. We know about some of the films already being pirated before it is released. It is seen by people from home, and the younger generations the younger generation would have access, and they have the ability to do so. So what do you think about this? Because there's a question on where digital media is already going.
Yeah, I mean, that's is pretty quite obvious, and it was rampant at some point, especially when there was VHS, for example. So Dr. Enriquez was right. I mean, while she was talking, immediately I said, "Oh, this applies so much to films." You know, I mean, all these copyright violations. Any violation is really an ethical issue. So. Uh, how does one correct that? So in our but if we stick to the question, which is it's a research that we are doing. What could possibly be violated there as long as we make citations and recognition? I think that can be corrected, right? I mean, it may not be enough to really just talk about, okay, so what are the legal impediments? What are the ethical issues? Because the system can self-correct itself. So you need to really know referencing, citation, bibliographic. It's established, all right? We cannot possibly make that mistake. If ever we make that mistake, it's really an honest-to-goodness mistake. But otherwise, within the system, this problem of violation and ethical issues and all that, medyo protected din naman tayo if we follow those. So, cite, know how to... Marami kasi dyan, citation lang, hindi pa marunong. Diba? Mamili ka, APA, Chicago. So, at ang problema naman, I'll go now, and perhaps Dr. Encanto will come in here after me nga bale. Tayo naman na nagtuturo ng research, hindi nga natin tinuturuan ang mga bata natin. I know that we are talking here about students and teachers who are teaching media research. Tayo mismo, hindi natin tinuturuan ang mga estudyante natin how to do research, how to do referencing. Tayo mismo, tamad din tayo kung minsan, di ba? I mean, mabusisi tayo sa mga ginagawa ng mga bata pero hindi naman natin tinuturuan because may sistema po na pwede mo ma-avoid yung mga ethical issues na yan. Kung ang problem ay you are borrowing ideas, you are quoting this, you are quoting that. Ang problem that is presented is what will be our problem as historical researchers. So, ang sagot ko na po doon ay matuto tayo na mag-reference, magalang sa sources natin. Huwag natin isipin na, wow, that piece of information was, my own personal discovery. So perhaps I'd love to hear from Dr. Encanto how she would resolve this conundrum.
I always tell my students, you know what came from you and what you got from some other people.
Yes.
It's really all just a matter of honesty. So that when you take notes or when you read something, make sure that you can cite where you got it from. And Betsy was saying, secondary sources and primary sources, making that distinction. It's okay to get information from other sources. I mean, as long as you paraphrase and you cite where you got it from. And that's why, you have to indicate when exactly you downloaded something so that your referencing is on record.
All right.
We really have to be very meticulous. And I like your observation that we're not teaching them how to do it.
I guess it's also
I'm embarrassed, Dr. Encanto. I'm embarrassed.
No, I remember I once gave a talk in, I think, Fiati or something. And the teachers don't like the computer because they said,
yes,
students just keep on copying and listening. So I think we have to teach
I guess they also the young ones, well, even us now, we take it for granted that as already mentioned that everything is available. It's really just a click of a finger, and so sometimes we just assume that this is something that we can use. But I guess it all boils down to ethics. It boils down to the legal aspect of it. Now let's move towards the question here, and I'd like to mention the question of Noji Bayet to Dr. Encanto, speaking about your love of magazines and how they supported the women's causes. What are your expectations for historic magazine Vogue publishing the first issue of its Philippine edition this September? Sorry, I'm not very sure about that.
Which publication is that? Okay. I should mention that, aside from maybe I concentrated so much on my exposure to magazines. My motivation was to have textbooks that I could use for my women and gender and women's magazines in the special topics. And I don't know what you were saying. You were saying something about the
yeah, I don't understand it also, but she's asking what are your expectations for historic magazine Vogue publishing the first issue of its Philippine edition this September. So I guess it's just republishing it. Noji, if you want to unmute because we don't quite understand. So this is about historical.
Yeah, I think there will be a Vogue Philippines being released soon.
It's a fashion magazine.
Oh, yes, Vogue is a fashion magazine.
The Philippine edition coming soon.
But historic magazine Vogue publishing. So you
maybe
mean it's coming to the Philippines?
A limited edition.
All right. So what do you think about that?
Because every magazine has its own market.
Correct.
You know, so I think I vaguely recall coming across a Vogue magazine, and I know it's mostly fashion. And so, well, what are my expectations? I mean, because every magazine has its own market.
All right.
And,
but isn't this already? Excuse me. But isn't this already an indication of globalization? That you know that now we are really very much
a lot of this
part of the global market. The Filipina is a global commodity now.
Correct. And you know, a lot of these magazines, Cosmopolitan, etc.
Yeah, that's right.
Editions here.
Correct.
Of following the formula of Cosmopolitan.
Okay, and related to that,
it's really a global. I remember Saria was telling me that when she studied in Spain, the University of Navarre, she took a course on magazines, and she said she was so embarrassed because, you know, they had all of these Elle and very beautiful women magazines, but we had nothing except what you call that, brown paper. We didn't have any of these glossy magazines. So she was so embarrassed not to be able to show anything. And that's why she started her own
the magazine. Mega. I think that's Mega. Now there's a question here.
I mean, it's really global.
There's a question here, Dr. Encanto, Dr. Enriquez, and Professor De Ocampo, regarding some Filipinos, because this person says that it seems that Filipinos fail to discern legitimate journalism from that of a PR-like journalism. So he'd like to get your insight. I guess it's also in the magazines. We cannot distinguish anymore if this is an advertorial or if this is an editorial, or is it just pure PR. So how do we go about it? Any one of you, please?
That's correct, because a lot of these magazines are really there for profit.
So
the editorial content is so limited because most are editorials, and even, you know, editorial matter has advertisements. Like sometimes you're reading something that you realize it's an advertisement for liposuction or for beauty products, simply because you know, it's publishing media, newspapers, magazines. They're all business first. They're all there for business, and it's only maybe how many publishers have any sense of what journalism is, you know, and what its purpose should be. That it's
more aesthetics, no?
Telling, and well, what you know, all of our emphasis is that journalism involves a certain process. A process of what we like to call it the science of verification. Because you cannot just publish anything. You can't just post anything. That's not journalism, no? So, because when we say science of verification, I mean, there is a process that you have to pass through. You know, in the past, they had these media organizations that had editors, publishers, news editors, sports editors, etc. And, you know, the reporters would be given assignments, and then they would have to give these assignments to their editors, who would then check them, and then this would go through a process of editing, you know, copy editing, and at the news desk, there would be quality control, because something that was not true would be caught. You know, I mean, because the reporter would be made to account for what he wrote. But nowadays, everyone can be a journalist, or so they think. They just keep on posting things, or sometimes they even repeat things. They don't
Yes.
even know where it started, you know, and what the source is, etc. So that is not journalism.
I guess
It-
when people feel that they're also creators because they have the gadgets, they have the devices. Now
Just to make
anyone can actually be a filmmaker.
correct.
So they
Yeah.
say, Professor De Ocampo, you know, their
Yeah.
own TikTok, their own vlogs. It's a
Correct.
what used to be just a blog now is a vlog. So what can you say about that? They claim it's also when the vloggers want respect that they can actually be considered journalists in their own right. Professor?
This is the result exactly of our reaction towards the destruction of the hegemonic. So
Yes.
I would like Dr. Enriquez to join me here, because we have, you know, for the past 100 years, at least for cinema, and I bet also for publication and radio, that, you know, we had been against the hegemonic control of media. The 20th century was really controlled by capitalism. We all heard that from the talk that we had. So now here we are in the 21st century, already prophesied by postmodernism, post-structuralism, all right, talking exactly about the minute details and not the essences of things. So we have to face this new reality. You know, I am now into the analysis of and interpretation of cinema as rhizomatic. Rhizomatic really gives us now the power of the detail of the individual against the state, against the capitalist, against the industry. So with the collapse of industrial cinema, this is what we get. So my book, and I just want to shamelessly
Go ahead. Go
show
ahead.
my book, okay, a very thick 800-page book, that this is part, you know, I don't want us to immediately dismiss this, you know, pulverization of media as something already very negative, and it is it is anti-tradition, definitely, but it has its ideological reason. This is now exactly a critique of the industrial. It is a critique of the dominance, of the hegemonic, of the arborescent, of the hierarchy of power with a capital P. But what do we make use of it now? So we keep talking about power to the individual. You know, this question about ethics, legal impediments, freedom now
Yes,
comes
that makes
to the
sense.
fore again. Let us really
Right.
talk about, you know. So in other words, media is now being contested, challenged, and be made to redefine itself. So my response now, that's why my book is no accident. The very fact that I can interpret Philippine cinema now, and it is proven by empirical data and facts right now because of the innumerable, countless films, short films that are being produced in this country, far outnumbering the films produced by the movie industry, which is not there anymore. All right, stop looking for it, because the films are now in the hands of the students and the TikTokers. Why not?
Yes, exactly.
All right. So I conclude by saying exactly that we need to grapple with this. So I talk about the rhizome as a way of theoretically understanding what is going on, instead of really dismissing that, oh my God, you know, it's now in the hands of amateurs. Oh my God, you know, this is not cinema. This is not art. This is not anything. No, this is new art.
This is the
This
new
is a
trend.
new
Yes.
ideology. This is new. Again, how does capitalism figure here? So this is anti-capitalist, but we cannot escape from capitalism. So what is it? You know, what form of capitalism is this now? You know, so this is a big challenge for us scholars, intellectuals, academics, you know, of what to make out of media now.
Thank you very much. Well said. Go ahead. It seems that Dr. Enriquez wanted to also say
Yes, her
something on
body
that note.
language.
I just want to object to the phrase
Yeah.
Filipinos. It's not like
Okay.
we're the only ones,
Tama. No,
you
no,
know,
no. That's correct.
involved in this. No, this
No,
is
no, no.
global. No, this is
Yeah,
global.
yeah, it is.
I think the person who asked the question is also concerned about while the rhizome is really an interesting theory, no, to understand what's going on online, no, there is a real concern about fake news, disinformation, no. Totoo yan eh. Hindi natin, we cannot dismiss that, no, as part of the rhizome. Yes, actually, it's rhizomatic too, no. But the point is this good, no? It's because it's true that it is actually threatening a lot of our institutions that we would like to keep. Some of our institutions we really want to break, no. So, but there are things that we want to keep, no, and this is a threat. So how do we manage this? Okay,
On that,
so
on that note, there's a question,
Yes, go
Dr.
ahead.
Enriquez, for you. That radio is fading away
Okay.
at this age,
Okay.
and that radio, that the youth, that the younger generation are they're not interested in on listening because everything is by demand. You know, they have
Yes.
Spotify.
Yes.
So, what can you say about this that radio is called as a medium for the oldies? You were saying
No.
Actually, even television, eh. Diba? Even television, eh. People are watching less TV and watching everything that they want to watch online, no? Television
demand
shows,
talaga.
films, listening to music, podcasts, and all that. But you see, we always think of a medium dying because a new medium has emerged in the scene, no? Just like when the video came, diba? Tandaan yung video.
Netflix.
No, yeah, pero merong isang kanta nun eh, nung lumabas yung video, yung television. The fear was that it will kill film, di ba? It would kill cinema, no? But that didn't happen. In fact, cinema found a new outlet, no, which is television. Now, going back to the question, Marge, no?
Go ahead.
The thing is, the media is changing, it's shifting, it's not disappearing, nothing is disappearing, it's shifting, no? Nagbabago ang anyo ng broadcast, no? Nawala ba yung pakikinig nawala ba yung pakikinig sa talk show? Nawala ba yung pakikinig sa musika?
Nag-teleradyo na nga.
Nag-iba lang ang
Yes.
nag-iba lang ang platform, pero nandun pa rin ang pakikinig, di ba?
Correct.
So the radio is online. And as a matter of
Yes.
fact, I think we need to remind our students that the law mandates that everybody should turn digital, no? As a matter of fact, we're behind already. Ang original na law, if I remember correctly, kasi postpone na ng postpone, no? Television should have been 100% digital by 2015, and that has been moved, no? And I think now the target is 2023. I'm not sure anymore.
So that's a question on the direction of digital. No, go ahead.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yes, and then radio is supposed to be fully digital at a later date, no? Pero I think nauuna yung radyo ngayon kasi mas simple actually yung teknolohiya ng audio lang, di ba? Even teleradyo is easier, no? But just because we have a new technology where everything is converged, no? Although medyo hirap akong gamitin yung term na converge kasi controversial for me yung term na convergence, eh, no?
Yes.
But just for just to
to have that word, no? Yeah.
For want of a better word at the moment, no? All media are online now, no? Does that mean we will stop reading the news? Of course not. That's the first thing I don't know about you, but the first thing I do when I wake up in the morning is look for the news. I don't reach for a newspaper anymore, that's true. But I read it online, no?
Exactly.
And look for material that I want to read. I suppose that takes the place of reading magazines, no? And after a whole day's work, at masakit na ulo ko sa katatrabaho natin, I go to Netflix or I go look for a movie, no?
It's mentioned here about podcasts. Podcasts now,
podcasts,
yes.
There's a lot of fantastic material on podcasts, no? And there's so many stations of people doing podcasting. And the world is our oyster because we're online. the entire globe is your audience, no? So just because we have a new medium here, a new platform, does not mean it has killed the older platforms.
All right, Dr. Enriquez, they found it, that line or phrase from that song, they said it's video killed the radio
The
star.
radio star, right.
But it did not. Seemingly, it did not.
It did not. As a matter of fact, yeah, there are a lot of small community radios that are still thriving. And do you know that there is an international organization of college radios, of which DZUP is a part, and we are encouraging many university and college radios in the country to become part of it. There are hundreds and hundreds of members of that. And once a year, there is a big conference and we all go on the air. You know, we're usually given one hour to go on the air. We broadcast throughout the entire world.
Wow.
And there is an app, actually, you look for it online. There is an app, just look for it. You want to listen to radio in Italy, just go to the map and it will, you know,
allow you to listen to that. Yes, Dr. Sir De Ocampo, go ahead po.
Let us turn it on its head, the observation that you know, this radio and even cinema now, no, is just you know, for old people. Hey, you know, I mean, let us really look at the demographics of the country. Sooner rather than later, our demographics will be more older people. You know, will be, you know, will comprise the larger part of our population, and the young people. God, just like in Japan, look at the crisis in Japan and so many other Western cities, wherein the pyramid has now inverted. All right, they will now have little people, you know, little population in terms of the young people, and hey, you know, it will be the glory days of radio, and you know, if that is exactly what is being said in that comment, that it's for old people. Now, I'm beginning to see it already in sa mga taxi na nasasakyan ko nga bale. My God, drivers nakikinig sa soap opera, sa soap drama. Sabi ko, my God, sa isang linggo na ito, nakalimang taxi ako, 4 doon. Nakikinig po kayo sa sa soap drama, sa soap opera. Sabi na, oo eh. And, you know, titingnan mo ang edad nila, may edad na sila. And sabi ko, my God, grabe ang power ng radio. No? Hindi sila nakikinig sa music. It used to be music tayo ng music. Pag sumakay tayo, pag sumampa tayo sa taxi, di ba? Bigla na lang puro mga of course, news is another thing, no?
Of course.
So I don't really think that, you know, and as I said, well, it will be great because our population pyramid is going to invert anyway, so that's it. There will be more market for radio, for magazines, and yes, for cinema as well.
Yes, because this generation will still seek somehow, no, what they have been used to. All right, you know, it's 6:55. We have 5 minutes to 7. But before we do end this webinar, maybe just one last thought from our speakers here. We are here regarding that field of historical research that you're doing. Just one last thought from your end to our viewers. Dr. Encanto, Dr. Enriquez, and then Professor De Ocampo. Dr. Encanto,
Well, I hope,
one short message.
Yeah, I hope a lot of the students will continue the research. And I mean, go into research because there's a lot more to do.
Yes.
You know, women's magazines, there's a lot to study about women's magazines. And community newspapers, because these have, you know, been dismissed or overlooked, but actually they have in their own way, they have a lot of good potential about them. And there are a lot of campus papers, small community papers, and I hope students will also think of going to start their own community papers instead of just going to the mainstream media. Because as you said, they can do it now in a digital way, or you know, they can have all kinds of platforms, but make it local, because that's what makes newspapers, community newspapers different. So I hope they'll continue.
Thank you very much, Dr. Encanto. So that is a call for all our students and even our oops. Okay, we'll request those who are listening to us. I'm not sure. There's a mic that's on. Please make sure you mute yourself. All right. Okay. At this point, Dr. Enriquez, and I think you posted something in the chat
Yes.
box. Go ahead.
Yeah. I want to mention two things. I want to say two things. Number one is, kung pwede ring mag-plug, no?
Go
we're,
ahead.
we're celebrating the 100th year of broadcasting in the Philippines this year. 1922 was the date of the first commercial broadcast in the country. So it's 2022 now, no? And one of the things we're trying to do is to kickstart an archives of broadcasting in the Philippines. And because the problem with research is that there's hardly any material to go by, no? And I mentioned some of the reasons earlier. And you can contribute. The faculty who are here with us tonight, those who are students, those who are researchers, you can contribute to these archives, but by just keep on researching, and then hopefully we can make these archives available to everybody, no? We want to make it open source, but give us a little time because we need to grow an archives, no? So that's one. The other thing is there is another way. Kasi merong question na pin-prepare si Dean March, kala ko nga itatanong mo na
Ang
how
dami
do
po
we,
kasing
Oo nga, daming tanong,
ating mga viewers.
which is good, no? Yung tanong mo kasi is how do we publish, no? May isang tanong dito, how do we publish, no? I wanted to say that yes, publication is good, and it's actually still the gold standard in our scholarship. We and especially yung mga faculty dito, talagang required tayong mag-publish, di ba? No? So but there is another way to do history, and that is through public history. Look it up, what is meant by public history. And I just posted the link to 3 episodes of my current production. I'm executive producing several productions actually in honor of the 100th year of broadcasting. And these are all about history. And this is one way to publish history. It doesn't always have to be a journal na hindi lahat ay naaabot. Pero kung gagamitin natin yung ating media, telebisyon, radyo, pelikula ha, at saka yung print online, all of that, we put it online, then we will have more people interested in history by producing public history there.
All right. Maraming salamat, Dr. Enriquez. And finally, Professor De Ocampo.
Yeah, as I mentioned in my piece kanina, it is not enough only to be a scholar and researcher in this country. It is not enough. Keep that in mind. All right. And so I join my 2 other colleagues here in this call for action. I think the 3 of us, if there's one issue that unites us, it's this call for an archive. And we call the attention of our dean of our college. It can be a great contribution. Exactly. Dahil tatlo kami, ang aming conclusion ay we need to have an archive, a repository of memory. Sa tatlo sa amin, ang researchers lang namin, isang center na ang pwedeng maitayo. Si Dr. Enriquez and her research on broadcasting, especially sa radio. Si Dean Encanto sa kanyang community papers, which, I was just listening to her. It was immense. And me, 40 years of research sa lahat na major archives in the world, sa kasaysayan ng pelikula, sa tatlo pa lang sa amin, ano pang hahanapin ninyo? All right? We can be a one-stop shop. And many of our documents have been digitized. I am really waiting for my own institute to really take the challenge already. I'm going to donate my personal archive. All right, the entire archive that I have na Bali, which allowed me to write already 11 books. I cannot be selfish about this. How much more? Hey, Dr. Enriquez, yung kanyang kinart away from the Library of Congress, the heritage that na accumulate ni Dean Encanto. I'm just looking at Makinuo Galingon from Iloilo, and I come from Iloilo. This is immense. History has been written in all of these documents that we have. So that the biggest legacy, at least the 3 of us here right now can have, is really to put up. And please, if we have to sign Dean Encanto and Dr. Enriquez, let's have a blood pact on this. Panindigan na ng institute na magkaroon na ng Center for Media Archiving because sa tatlo pa lang sa atin, mayaman at mayabong na ang ating koleksyon. With that, I think we are now addressing the future because we have a legacy to give them. Maraming salamat po.
And thank you for your generosity. Thank you for looking forward. And it seems that our Dean Hernan has committed and sabi niya po ay yes po, gawin natin for our 60th anniversary. In fact, there are more comments here on managing audiovisual archives in the context of the Philippines. And of course, many are sending their gratitude, thanking you that you have been very, very inspiring, that perhaps this will be the people, this will be the students and the faculty supporting you in towards reaching that dream of having a center for the archives. So, yes. So
I
looks
just
like
want to add something.
Go ahead.
Can I just add something?
Sure.
You know, most of the victims of killings come from the community press. So I think it's time, you know, I asked Dean Paragas, what has BASCOM been doing? Why are there no statements on all the media issues, on anti-terror law, cybercrime, killings of journalists, why don't I hear from MASCOM? So I want to hear more from MASCOM, statements on these issues, and then more of the archiving. My question is, what do you do with everything we recommended tonight and in your webinars? I mean, I think the training that MASCOM should do should now be more practical. No more trimedia or all of that, but more on, you know, how to make the students engage in all these issues that are right here unfolding in our society. We cannot be removed from what's going on. We have to engage with the journalists, with media organizations, you know, and all of that. So I want MASCOM to take the lead.
All right.
And it is through archiving, research. I told Dean Paragas, your specialization is research. So related to the, you know, all the media.
Okay.
And make it work together.
Dean Paragas, okay, speechless ka ba? Because I am not here. I'm not hearing anything from
Sorry.
you.
Appear.
I'm not hearing anything
No,
from you.
I'm
But
here. Yeah, and that's why precisely we have webinars like this, because we have to organize from the ground. But this is really our initiative, you know, to get a conversation started. And that is how we start moving. Katulad yan, di ba? We have the insights about archiving, then we'll get it started. And actually, this morning, I was already talking to Angela from Film Institute to get started, no, on archiving. And we are submitting a couple of grants already to get it started.
All right. Maraming salamat, Dr. Hernan. If there is such a thing as a startup for your archiving, this is the time and this is the blood compact, if that is what is needed. But I guess, as Dr. Hernan said, PACMRI has been very, very active in starting from the ground and starting up all of this. So again, thank you to our speakers for such an enlightening session. And I do hope that all our viewers or all those who are in this virtual space have been inspired and hopefully become eventually a part of the community of media history scholars. All right, so if our guests have already plugged their own books and their own series and their own researches. And so PACMRI now will plug also that this August, we will start our masterclass webinar series where we will be focusing on mentorship. In this series, we will discuss worldviews that importantly inform our research and its various processes. Our first masterclass webinar session will be on August 3 from 3 to 5 p.m. It will focus on research excellence frameworks and will feature Dr. Joyce Ariola of UST, Dr. F.P.A. Demetrio of De La Salle University, Dr. Alexander Flor of UP Open University, and Dean Hernan Paragas from UP Diliman. The next masterclass webinar entitled Conceptualizing Research, Agenda and Vantage Points will be on August 17. Please visit our PACMRI Facebook page for details. Thank you again for spending this early afternoon with us. Please help us improve our webinar by accomplishing the evaluation form that will be posted in the chat box. I hope you see that, folks. Certificates will be issued to participants who complete the evaluation form on or before 11:59 p.m. of July 27, 2022. Mabuhay at padayon sa ating lahat. See you on August 3 as we start our masterclass in mentoring webinar series.